Hello and welcome to the program. I am Abisola Adebayo. This year's COP27 Climate Summit in Egypt is finally coming to an end, with nearly 200 countries racing to strike a deal to steer the world towards cutting planet-warming emissions and scale-up finance for countries being ravaged by climate impacts. Some negotiators and observers warn that failure to agree on such loss and damage funding could sour the United Nations talks and thwart other deals. The issue has leapt to the top of political priorities at the summit after more than 130 developing countries successfully demanded it was added to the agenda for the first time, following more than a week of talks that left much unresolved and featured speeches from dozens of world leaders but scant announcements of new fundings and pledges to cut emissions faster. Negotiators now face a mammoth list of items on which to clinch deals by the end of the week. Announcements so far include a few $100 million of funding for poorer nations pledged by Germany, Australia, the United States of America, and others, far off from the hundreds of billions that vulnerable countries need to cope with escalating droughts, floods, and rising seas every year. Government ministers have since taken over the negotiations in the summit to also hunt for a deal that attempts to avoid any weakening of ambition to address climate change. So, has this COP27 summit really achieved its target, and did it eventually live up to expectations? Joining me to discuss all of this further is Olumide Idowu. He is the co-founder of International Climate Change Development Initiative. Thank you so much for joining me on the program, Mr. Olumide. So, you know, it's just a day until the end of COP27. What would you say has been achieved so far? What are some of the highlights and discussions that have been held so far, especially regarding the African continent?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this privilege to speak. Just so you know that as we are fighting for the climate conversation, and as we are fighting for the response for African countries, I can tell us now that the loss and damage conversation lately, we've been able to get the technical support from the developed country. But that was related to the Santiago agreement. But we are still looking at what is going to happen. And as I'm talking to you, another session is starting again on the loss and damage conversation. And we are always, you know, according to the African Group of Negotiators, we've not really gotten what we are looking for, because as long as Africa is the part of continent that is suffering and, you know, is the brunt of climate change, then this conference is supposed to be an implementation conference, but we are not seeing that as of now. 2 days ago, gender, you know, constituency also have the same thing. Nothing is coming forth. We don't want to continue to have promises. We don't want to continue to have pledges that is not, you know, translate to implementation. Australia, United States have pledged another money. How come are we getting pledges when the one that pledged a couple of years ago, the $100 billion, have not really even been, you know, given to developing countries, the global south? So how do we continue to talk about this issue and turn the conference to like Christmas, you know, activities yearly? So for me, I think the African Group of Negotiators, they are really doing their best, and it is high time for us as African countries to start looking at the kind of languages we are using in negotiating, so that we not look as if we are begging for money, we are just asking for money every time. But we need a concrete action that will put us in a place whereby everything we talk about will really come to implementation. But for this conference, I think we are still a step backward as well again. But for the issue of loss and damage, which I'm also following up, I can tell you that as of yesterday night, we've been able to reach a support for technical support. But when you say technical support, you need to define it. So those are the kind of things we are still looking forward to know whether we are still on the right track when it comes to loss and damage, to know whether we're still on the right track when we're talking about adaptation. So it's for us, it's very, very disappointing that we are still going back and forth with promises and pledges rather than implementation that we are looking for.
Okay, yeah, so you said the African Group of Negotiators they are yet to get what they want. What exactly would that be?
That's what I'm saying is concerning them making pledges. Fine. You are telling them that you are making pledges, but how do you make sure that these pledges turns to implementation? Because they've made such pledges in 2019 in Spain. They made such pledges through the global Glasgow Pact. What is happening now is you've not talked about the implementation of what you've said before. Now you are making another pledge. I remember during the speech of the United States President, he make emphasis on the flood and the disaster that is happening to some countries across the world. But the pledges are really not concrete in the sense that how will it translate to implementation? That is what we are talking about.
I mean, apparently, and with what you've actually said, finance has been on the front burner of this particular summit. African nations have made demands for monetary commitment from these developed nations. Do you actually think that money would solve the issues of climate change in Africa?
Yeah, anybody that you ask that will say yes. But how are we asking for this money? Are we asking for this money in loan? Or we are asking for this money by making sure that the Africa suffer from their influence? So they need to give us this money, not by loan. Most of all this money have been given to us by loan. You don't even have money to solve our problem presently. You are giving us a loan. When do we pay back? So what they need to do for us is to give money for adaptation. And money for adaptation cannot be loan. We're talking about mitigation as well. Technology is there. How many African countries can actually invest in technology to drive the economy? So financial mechanism need to be spelled out, and people need to understand that how to access this finance also matters a lot. So every money being given to Africa must not come in loan. There must be a negotiation on how this money is going to be spent, what this money is going to be used for, so that we will not continue to find ourselves owing developed countries every time and down. Thank you.
You know, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni and even other African leaders that are in the summit, they've accused the Western countries of, reprehensible double standards when it comes to commitment to stop climate change. Would you agree with this, that other developed nations are not so invested in restoring the earth?
Well, that's a conversation that needs to be because every leader of every country is making sure that they speak to their needs. For the case of Nigeria, we're talking much about the energy transition to our ETP, the National Determined Contribution. We're also looking at loss and damage. But for every country that is talking about anything, that means that is the urgent action that is needed to be solved. But why I always bring in the African group of negotiators is because they are the ones that negotiate on behalf of Africa in some particular instance. The issue of climate finance, the issue of loss and damage. So each country have their own demand, and those demands are also bilateral conversation with investors, with institutions. So those world leaders that have said their own is based on the need of their country and how they see climate change today.
With the summit finally coming to an end, would you say there's been workable agreements in place that would maybe shape climate actions before the next summit next year?
We are always hopeful, but I'm just optimistic that we will still get back home and nothing. To be very frank with you, we've not gotten to anywhere. And the only thing I've worked in this conference is that a lot of countries have had a lot of bilateral agreement with institutions that is also promising. But those promises are promises that is tackling some specific issues. But when it comes to the negotiation table, we've not really gotten the developed country to make commitment. Then it's a genuine commitment that will solve the climate crisis. To our world leaders or African leaders to start looking inward. How can we retool the ideas and the opportunities that we have now as our natural resources to change the narrative of what we are looking at? So for me, in the scale of 1 to 10, I think we are 4 over 10 because we've not really gotten what we are looking for because of the technical support they say they are giving to the Santiago framework. Maybe that is the only thing I can say the major outcome for us as a continent coming from Africa or the global south. But for now, actual outcome we are looking at is not yet reflected in the implementation of action back home in Africa.
So I was asking you to talk about the other contentious issues in the talks in the summit that's still really unresolved, despite a Friday deadline.
Yeah, okay. So climate finance is a big issue. It looks like nobody is attending to that presently, because when somebody said our country, our continent, Africa is owning them, it shows us that we are still in that frame of climate finance denial now. There's nobody that's making commitment and genuine commitment on climate finance. And the issue of mitigation, it has turned to they are leveraging on our incapacity when it comes to technology to make us to understand that are we ready for mitigation. And when you there's no how you want to talk about adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage without financing for communities. So those kind of issues are the issue that is coming in between all this conversation we are having. So I think, like I said, African developing countries, the global south, we need to retune the conversation to make them to understand that we are not begging. It is our right to get financing for adaptation, financing for loss and damage.
And briefly now, I want you to talk about expectations for the G20 summit. Other people see it as another opportunity to call on these rich nations to honor their promises to tackle climate change. So what are your expectations of the discussion, and do you expect to see some major deals, especially on climate finance, to be made?
Yeah, thank you very much. G20 has turned to something like Christmas that we do every time. But my own expectation is just very simple. African leaders, how do we start thinking inwardly to make sure that we are always ready before we add the conversation with these developed countries? Because we are still the ones giving them advantage of what they are doing, and we need to tackle that issue now. Another thing again we need to look at critically is that are we ready to access financing as a country? If we are not ready, then we are just, or as a continent, then it is not going to work. Like they said, anything for us without us, it is not meant for us. So every conversation they are going to be having that is not including the local community that is suffering from the brunt of climate change, then it is not meant for us. So what leaders during G20 should look at what they are causing, and African leaders should look at how to galvanize support from the to actually talk about the issue that is climate change is facing. Not only in asking for the money, but letting them know the story that is happening on ground. Because when you don't show those things to them, for them to understand numbers of people that are displaced, numbers of people that are into poverty, energy poverty, then nothing will actually happen. They will always think that we are asking for money. So what leaders, African leaders, we should not go and ask for money, rather ask for or look for stories that will be able to speak to these people for them to release that fund that is meant for Africa to work on adaptation and lesson damage.
Well said, Mr. Olumide Idowu, environmental expert. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today, and thank you for your insights. Well, we'll go on a short break now, and when we come back, we'll be talking about economy. Stay with us.